We're on.
And
Hi, everybody.
hello, everybody. I love you, Peggy. I'm really. You look. No, actually, your hair looks very nice. Your hair looks very nice right now. Just in case you're wondering. Not that I'm trying to judge you based on your appearance or anything, but I'm always interested in, your living hair. Anyway, welcome. We are the Chicago Brain Buddies. That there's Professor Peggy Mason of the University of Chicago, professor of neurobiology, and the star of Understanding the Brain, the Neurobiology of Everyday Life, everybody's favorite MOOC on Coursera.
Yeah.
So I wonder if no, we have not shared this bad boy. Let me do this right now, though. We have not shared this particular one with the group. Let me do that right now because we are. Oh, I don't even know where this is. Let's see here. Hold on. 5. I don't even know where this is. Do you see any? Is anybody on here?
Yeah, it says one viewer.
I'm all confused. I don't know why this is not showing up on my thingy. Well, we'll give me one more second to do this, and then we will just move on, and folks can watch it on the replay. This is no one's fault except mine, not understanding properly how to make this thing work. And I don't see it. So it's just being...
I think I'm going to stop and come back because I have a big echo.
Okay, okay, stop and come back, and I'll figure out how to make this thing work, baby. Are we on? We are not on. We're not on yet. It's nothing but trouble today on the Brain Buddies. Oh, okay. It looks like we're on now. Now it looks like we're on. Okay. So we are on, and I'll share it with my little friends. All right. And now I think I'm on. And there. All right. You're there. Well, it is just a hi there, who's on? I don't know who's on, but hi there. It's a day of technical difficulties with the Brain Buddies, but it still will work on the video replay.
So I think we're on actually right now.
Yeah, well, we may be on in the worst case scenario. But what are we going to talk about today, young Peggy?
Well, we're going to talk about the body in space. We're going to talk about the space program because I just finished this book called Rocket Men. There are 2 books called Rocket Men, but I just finished one by Craig who?
Craig Nelson, who is an extremely charming, cute guy. Have you seen his speeches? Seen him talk?
What's his last name?
Nelson.
Craig Nelson.
Yes.
No, I haven't seen his speeches. I read the book, and the thing is, sadly enough, we gave up on going to the moon with Apollo 17, right? We got to the moon at 11. We went for a while. 13 was an exciting failure.
Hi, Loani. We love you. Sorry.
And then we quit at 17.
Yes.
And most scientists I know, even though I have nothing to do with the planet, geophysics, astrophysics. I have nothing to do with that. I love the space program, and I miss it so much. I'm so sad that we are not really doing manned space flights as we used to.
By the way, can I just ask? You use the term, and I wonder if there's a substitute, more politically correct term.
For manned space flights?
Yeah.
I don't know. Peopled space flights.
Okay. So one of the things that Craig Nelson talks about is that the most important quality of an astronaut is the ability to be cool. under pressure, which is to say that, as you know, that Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, they say that when he sat atop the first rocket about to be launched, his pulse rate was 42 beats per minute.
Well, okay. I was just reading about Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong while they're out there. Aldrin was at 125 and Armstrong was at 156. They were not cool. They were.
Understand?
They were going. They were. That is very high. Those are high heart rates.
I understand. That's why it was so noteworthy that Yuri Gagarin was. Now, again, it could be propaganda because I didn't see the EKG.
Well, I mean, it's a different thing to be. I don't know. I don't know if walking on the moon versus sitting on Earth about to go.
Well, but the first guy ever to be launched off a giant exploding tube of fuel. I mean, I don't know about you.
I mean, it's so interesting because this whole thing depends on hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of parts, put together over so many years, and it all has to work. It's such a complex thing. And speaking of Yuri Gagarin, he was the first man to actually reach space, and he was a Russian. And so that was fodder for one of the motivations to get to space, which was to compete with the Russians, because it was a time of the Cold War. But it wasn't really the only motivation.
Our little buddy Lawani says human space program.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm talking about, we have a space program, but we send out robots.
Yes.
So sending people in rockets, that's what I miss.
And we are going to talk some about the neurobiology of it, but I do want to point out and ask you, but that when I saw the first Sojourner's picture of a Martian sunrise, that was freaking thrilling to me. The whole Sojourner thing back in the early 2000s was just, I truly felt like I was on Mars. I genuinely did. I felt like at the time it was just really, really inspiring to me. But
well, I think that a lot of what Apollo did was to, there's a quote in here where it says, excuse me, that it really ended up not being about the Earth. The big surprise, not about the moon. The big surprise was not the moon, but the sight of the Earth as this precious oasis, the only color visible in the blackness of space. And I think that they, that picture that Anders took of the blue Earthrise over the barren moon desert. The moon is coming up, and there's the Earth is coming up over the moon desert. And time and again they talk about how meaningful it is for them to see this little bit of color, this precious, small, vulnerable, lonely little place. And another one which I really liked was, who was it that said this? It was I don't know who said it, but he was talking about going around the Earth in an hour and a half. So he goes around the Earth every hour and a half, right? Mm-hmm. And he looks down there and he says, you see California, and then you see Houston, and you say, oh, that's where I'm from. And then you see this, and then you see that. And then you come to the Middle East and you realize there are no boundaries. You can't see a boundary. And he says this thing, at the Middle East, there are hundreds of people killing each other over some imaginary line that you can't see. From where you see it, the thing is a whole. Yep. And it's so beautiful. And you wish you could take one from each side in hand and say, look at it from this perspective. Look at that. That's what's important.
Speaking of which,
and I think that's just beautiful.
Well, you do know, and there's some absolutely fascinating stuff that goes on with the brain, some fascinating stuff that goes on with with one's vision. But I want to point out there's a very interesting Jewish connection to the fact that on the space shuttle you see 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every 24 hours. You know about this? So for all observant Jews, the first thing you do in the morning is you say Modani, but you make this morning prayer called Shachrit. So if there's 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets every day, which one do you make your first morning's prayer to? And so NASA actually assembled a team of Beit Din, 3 space rabbis, to decide which sunrise that an observant Jew would make his blessed morning prayers to. And did you know what the answer was?
No.
Where the sun rose, the last place on earth you were. So you make shachrit to where whatever the sunrise is.
Where you left.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway,
yeah.
So now,
and I just think it's really great that the scientists can have this humanist perspective. I also think it's great that as time went on, NASA recognized this and started to send non-scientists up, or I guess I don't know if that has happened again after Challenger, but they tried it anyway. It was a good thought, a good idea.
So there's some really interesting stuff that happens, as you point out, for example, to Yuri Gagarin when he first.
So Yuri Gagarin, right? So he has this thing where he says, "It seemed as though my hands and legs, my whole body did not belong to me. They did not weigh anything. You neither sit nor lie, but you just keep floating. So the body disappears in the weightless environment." He says the body no longer belonged to him because it wasn't behaving the way his body behaved. So that's not his body. But he says, okay, that's something else. It's not my body. Now, it's just so interesting. It's the reverse of, say, amputation pain, or a phantom limb, where you imagine a limb where there isn't. Here's some stuff. It is connected to you physically, but it doesn't feel as though it's yours.
So this is a bunch of neurobiology, isn't it?
It's total neurobiology, and
it has to do with proprioception.
It has to do a lot. I think it has to do a lot with proprioception.
And what's proprioception?
So proprioception is all this information you get back, and it's at a very unconscious level, but you're getting all this information back about your body. I can close my eyes and I can know where my arms are in space, my hands are. Right. Or if I close my eyes, I can bring these 2 fingers together, and I can do that pretty well. Right? So I can do this even though I can't see it. So the only way I can do that is with proprioception.
So why is that messed up in microgravity?
Because presumably these receptors depend on some gravity to actually they're signaling all the time, but in weightlessness, there's nothing to signal them. There's, the muscles have no weight. The joints have no weight.
So all the fine motor coordination, the fine motor movements that are so influenced by our cerebellum.
Yeah.
Those fine movements were all developed because the cerebellum is practice, as my
right. But this is not just movements, but this is the person's body image or self-conception of who they are. And we should talk about this book that I could walk over and get it, but I think my screen will protest. Anyway, there's a disorder called body identity disorder, I think it's called. And there's a book that's just out about it, which I haven't read it yet, but it's about people who basically say it's the complete opposite of phantom limb. It's that leg that's right there is not mine. Take it off. Take it off. It's not mine. And I do understand that if you take it off, I'll have to go around on crutches. And they still want it taken off. And there is some group of physicians and surgeons that will do this. Body identity dysmorphia. Yeah, right. Thank you, Loani. So, this is just fascinating. But on a very short time scale, what Gagarin's observation tells you is that you're using all this unconscious stuff that you're never conscious of to feed the fact that you have a body, that you're embodied. And then, and then to go to your cerebellar link, it's also that if they do anything, so the example that's given at one point is you have an itch on your leg, and so you reach down to scratch your leg. Well, that reach is a momentum. It gives you momentum. So your body follows that reach, and the next thing you know, you're somersaulting in that direction. And yeah, and that's and then you're vomiting and blah, blah, blah.
Well, and that is another thing that there's, as you know, about the vomit comet, and that many people, and as a matter of fact, I believe when John Glenn, his last trip to space was aboard the space shuttle, and his joke was that his mission was to throw up, so they can study, because they wanted to study the effects of microgravity on an aging body. Because he was in like his, I don't know, 60s or 70s when he went up, and
right.
They wanted to see. So his job was to throw up, and he did. He did his job properly. But the other thing
there's a very amusing anecdote where somebody throws up, and it's very unexpected, and so it just goes everywhere. He doesn't get it into a bag, right? So it goes everywhere, and they end up spending the next couple hours collecting barf from all the instruments and all the various pockets of air in the spacecraft. It was, I mean, the challenges of being in zero gravity are many.
Well, microgravity, it requires, as you say, it reminds us, it's sort of like the one thing the fish can't know is that he's in the water. And the one thing that human can't understand is that we are operating in 1G. And there's just no way for us to even imagine. I can't possibly, well,
there's one way.
I'm sorry?
There's one way.
What?
Go to space.
Well, yes, but there's another way, which is train in water, which is what they do. You can there's suits that'll balance out the buoyancy of water with the weight of the suit, and so they do travel with that. It's not the same, but you can get close because you are operating a body outside of the gravitational constraints to which we've all become used.
Right.
So but tell us a little about, there is a weird kind of optical phenomenon that's really strange that happens to you and has to do with
one of the big things that happens is that, or one of the big things that's happened to us on Earth, it's very important, is that when we get up, we contract our muscles in our legs to push blood up so that it doesn't all pool in the legs.
Right.
Well, in 0G, it's not pooling in the legs. And so your head is getting way more blood than it is normally getting. You're getting it all the time. And so the intracranial pressure goes up a little bit, and it presses on, it goes through the optic nerve, through the canal that carries the optic nerve, and it presses a little bit on the retina. And so it deforms the retina. And so the retina is actually deformed when you're out there in 0G, and they have difficulty seeing. So all the astronauts are 20/20, whether they are born that way or whether they get LASIK, they are eventually 20/20. But once they're out there, they can be 2100.
And the
What I
effect can,
remember is that Scott Kelly, they studied this very much in Scott Kelly when he
who's an
came back.
identical twin. He's an identical twin.
He's an identical twin, and I couldn't find this recently, but my memory is that after a few months, it went back to normal.
Yeah, it did. Although, and not everybody experiences that kind of ocular deformation. But there have been astronauts who have spent, after a few months, it's taken them years to recover from it, and which diminishes a bit my enthusiasm for space travel. I mean, well, and it's a good question. I mean, so Loani, I ask you or anybody else who's watching, if you would it be worth 2 years of impaired vision to have a week in outer space? I mean, and again, it's not a guarantee that you'll have impaired vision.
I actually don't want to go to space. I don't want to go to space. I just want other people to go to space.
Well, okay,
I'm very happy for other people to go to space.
But novelty is the spice of life.
Okay.
We've talked that Yuri Gagarin and all these folks experience their bodies in a completely novel and unique way, the likes of which only a few hundred human beings have ever experienced. Have you no curiosity at long last, Professor? Have you no interest in experiencing a novel neurological experience?
I'm very happy to experience. I have experienced them. I had a little migraine aura without the migraine. That was fabulous. I love that. So, but no, I don't want to go out into space. But I want humans to go into space. I want us to continue to probe that. That's not my thing, but it is some people's thing. But I also think that we underestimate. There's a little bit of conversation towards the end of this book about, yeah, I mean, Loani says not much to do up there. So after for about a month, they're good. And after about a month, they start going stir crazy and they start getting irritable and they start having fights. And the play well with others thing comes to the fore. It's not easy. And if you're going to Mars and back, you're talking about years with people that are not your family. And the ability to biologically, what's the word for, be okay with being with these people day after day for years, that's a huge challenge. And I don't think we're close to solving that.
Well, we have sailors who have spent very long periods of time aboard nuclear submarines.
Okay.
They spent a lot of time in very tight, down, with a much worse view than anybody in space. Oh, by the way, that was really one of the interesting things about it, that when you're traveling to the moon, you don't see the moon getting closer. The Apollo 11 astronauts, they saw the Earth getting further away, but they couldn't actually, in Apollo 8, they couldn't actually see the moon until they were right up on it because of the orientation of the spacecraft itself, which is kind of an interesting thing. You can't see your destination, your goal coming towards you and getting looming larger.
I mean, this book does give a lot of particulars about the particular history of Apollo 11. And what I'd never realized is how many screw-ups there were and how they landed in a place that was not anticipated. And Collins never figured out where the hell they were. So Collins is trying to find them, and he never finds them. They find each other as after Armstrong and Aldrin blast off from the moon with, almost no extra fuel.
Well, what's interesting about that is that one of the reasons that they landed in the wrong place was because of these gravcons. Because of the unique history of the moon, there are areas of the moon that have queer concentration of mass, queer concentration of gravity that the computers that were supposed, because it was supposed to be a totally computerized landing, but because the computers were thrown off by these gravitational concentrations.
Right. So that was a really interesting thing. The Earth, I guess, is pretty standard.
Right.
But the moon has these pockets, I guess, of ore. So the magnetic pull in this area of the moon is different from that. And they just modeled it differently. So then they're going faster than they thought they were going to go.
They were like 2 miles off. But and this comes to a point that my good friend Peggy Mason likes to talk about, which is that artificial intelligence would have crashed the ship. Neil Armstrong had to manually control the landing. That the machine
manually controlled the landing, and he was driving everyone crazy because he wasn't landing it, and he came down within seconds of there being no fuel.
But
because what he saw was all these boulders, and he says, "I'm not landing on the boulders."
But he made a very soft landing.
Yeah,
which is to your point, though, that even the highest tech, there comes circumstances wherein improvisation is necessary.
Yeah, there was a lot of improvisation on Apollo 11, shocking amount. And so Lonnie asked whether cats can take space, and so I don't know. We never sent cats, but we did send chimps. And one of the stories that I don't know stuck with me was the story of Ham. Do you remember this?
Yes,
So Ham is chimp number 61. He went up in one of the early Mercury rockets. So he gets trained by getting these, juice or banana chips that if this part of the panel lights up, he's supposed to press this button, and then he's supposed to actually participate in the flight. So he's trained very strongly, and he gets rewards, and he also gets this shock if he doesn't do something right. So then they go, and he blasts off, and the capsule screws up during the flight and just sort of continually shocks him. By the time he got back, they give him an orange and an apple. Welcome back, Ham. And then there's a quote that says, he tried to bite anyone who dared draw near. So he was done with humans. And when he saw the capsule later, he made it quite clear that he had no interest in cooperating with the spaceflight program further. So this is he had this really, really bad experience, and he have nothing to do with the space program again.
So as we approach the end of our little half hour together, one of the things that I take away from this, is that space is more dangerous for brains and more disorienting than I might have imagined before listening to Craig Nelson. But that space affords opportunities for awe and for the recalibration of our sense of reality. We not only have to recalibrate how we think of our bodies in space, but as you point out, 100% of the people who've looked at the Earth from space have had the exact same reaction.
I think that's really true. I think when it comes down to it, there is science, but the humanist advantages and rewards to the space program just can't be overstated. And it's funny, at the very end of his book, Craig Nelson talks about this gathering that happened in California about, I don't know, several months after Apollo 17. And the question that the leader of the gathering, and it was a bunch of people from both astronauts and space flight controllers, and the question that was posed was, why did we just do that? Why did we dedicate a decade and a half to doing that? It was really a lot of work. And, they go around, and it was, there was a little bit of talk about the race with the Russians and the blah, blah, blah. And then Armstrong, summarizes it. And I didn't write it down, so I can't paraphrase him. But what he says is basically, we did it because it it's the loftiest thing that we can do, and it gives us a reason for being proud of our nation and our world and our people and who we each are. So the real reason for doing it was not scientific, but it was in fact humanist.
Well, the loftiest, most noble thing I can think of doing is spending a little bit of time every Thursday with my buddy, Professor Peggy Mason, Professor of Neurobiology. We are the Chicago Brain Buddies. We're here generally every Thursday at some point during the day. And so we will hopefully thank you. We want to thank Donna, thank Luani, and thank everybody for watching on the replay. We really, really, really appreciate your support. We are sponsored by the Chicago Society for Neuroscience, and we hope that you will join us again. Don't you hope so?
I sure do.
All right. Thank you guys very much.
Bye, everybody.
See you next week. Bye.